concerns, legitimate complaints by the U.S. speed skaters. And I'm going to run through those for you. First off, there was a significant increase in the volume and intensity of the training. It apparently was part of the 4-year Olympic preparation cycle. For a variety of reasons, there was an absence of consistent athletic trainer support. And those short-term trainers who were present often didn't know the athletes' bodies as well as someone who would have been there on a full-time, permanent basis. There was also the departure of 2 English-speaking coaches. There was an overall decrease in the number of full-time coaches. At the same time, there was an overall increase in the number of skaters on the team. There were a number of injuries and disappointing performances by the men's team during the season. And there was a reduced allocation of funds to certain skaters as required under the relevant rules, in part on the basis of the poor performance during the season. And finally, but not insignificantly, there was a general perception among the skaters that no one at U.S. Speed Skating would listen to them about their concerns, much less act on them. Now, in terms of addressing the specific allegations of physical and emotional abuse, it's also important to recognize that Coach Jesu generated very, very strong emotional reactions. There are a large number of skaters who today still strongly support Coach Chun and his methods. There's also a large number of skaters who are equally disappointed in his methods and feel very strongly and passionately that they do not benefit them as speed skaters. But it's important to recognize that there are 2 polarized groups with respect to Coach Jesu Chun. There was one particular allegation of physical abuse that I think is worth mentioning, because it may have been the most serious accusation that was made. There were accusations that there was an individual skater that had been, it was described in various terms as shoved, had been beaten up in an elevator. When we actually had an opportunity to speak to that particular skater, he had a very different response to the allegations. And he indicated that it was not as it had been described, and ended up sending an email later on that actually supported the coach. At the end of the day, after reviewing all of the allegations and talking to people who were with the skaters on a daily basis, we concluded that there was no evidence of a pattern of physical abuse. With respect to the allegations of emotional abuse, we have to acknowledge that those were very troubling allegations. And I want to emphasize that we feel that the skaters that have made those allegations made them with the utmost sincerity. But after talking to all of the staff, after talking with all of the skaters, our conclusion again was there was no pattern of emotional abuse. I want to emphasize that does not mean that we are condoning the methods or the tactics that were used by the U.S. speed skating coaches. And I also want to emphasize again that we are not questioning in any way the skaters who made those allegations and the sincerity with which they made them. We would be willing to take any questions at this time. Yes, sir.
Why was Coach Yo then suspended or put on administrative leave?
Q&A session started.
Did we just disconnect it?
That's fine.
Okay. Howard, he was put on administrative leave because it was reported in the investigation summary that we received this morning that he knew of the allegations almost immediately after the tampering took place and did not report it to the appropriate authorities. And so until we have more information about the circumstances and the timing, he was put on administrative leave.
And what sanctions are being recommended in your report for any of the athletes or coaches?
Howard, that's something that's part of the disciplinary process within U.S. Speed Skating, and that's something that will be playing out in the very near future. But at this point, we have not assembled our recommendations yet.
Tamara,
Mike?
who will coach the team going to the World Cup, and have you established for certain which skaters will go?
The deadline for the athletes to accept their bid to the team has not changed. That's still October 7th. With regard to, oh, sorry, excuse me, I've been told it's the 13th. With regard to who will coach the National Racing Program, that decision has not been made, but we will let you know as soon as we name an interim coach. I'm going to just take a quick question from the phone. Jenny, do you have somebody in the queue? Okay.
Hi, this is Phil Person with Chicago Tribune. I must admit that we had some trouble hearing during the course of this. I just want to make sure this, who was it who just said there was no recommendation?
That was Steve Smith. It wasn't that we don't have a recommendation, it's that we have not made one at this time because we're still early in the process of all of this information, Howard.
Phil.
And I need to understand,
Phil,
basically you put the assistant coach on administrative leave based on the idea that he did not properly report what had happened in a timely fashion.
That's correct.
Okay, now the question I'm asking is, if Simon Cho alleges that he was ordered to tamper with the skate by Coach Chun, and you have found no evidence, is there anything, maybe Greg Little from White Case wants to answer this, is there any suggestion in that answer that Simon Cho was not telling the truth, that he fabricated this, that he did it on his own?
It's a very good question. Let me clarify. Based upon our investigation, where we did not have subpoena power, witnesses were not testifying under oath, there was not the back and forth that you see in an adversarial proceeding like a trial or an arbitration. Our view is that there were conflicting, contradictory reports of what actually took place by at least 3, not 4, critical players. And based upon that, we did not believe that there is sufficient evidence for us to say, as independent investigators, that it was more likely than not that Coach Chow told Simon to tamper with those skates.
And if I could just follow that up, if given that, will U.S. Speed Skating then make a decision on Coach Chun's future based that has nothing to do with that allegation, or will U.S. Speed Skating seek further evidence?
This is Steve Smith. We have a disciplinary process that we will be going through in connection with this matter, and we will be making the decisions once we've had a chance to fully review the report and digest the contents of that, as well as the evidence that we have.
And how soon do you expect that to be completed?
You know, there are due process rights for the individuals involved, and so it will take a little bit of time, but we are proceeding on that right away.
Thank you.
I'm going to take another question from the room.
So in following on that, if there is no evidence of a continued pattern of emotional or physical abuse, shouldn't the coach be able to get back to work soon?
I'm not going to speculate on that. As Steve said, we have a disciplinary process that will undertake in the next few days, and they'll determine what appropriate action against either coach and Simon needs to be in place. Lynn?
In terms of recommending who may take over, will any of the fast team coaches be considered for?
No, that's not a part of the consideration right now. I'm going to take another question from the phone. No more? Okay. Any other questions from the room then?
Do you expect the arbitration to go on Monday?
The arbitration, because of the arbitration has been rescheduled for to start November 1st. Obviously, it's a very fluid situation at this point, so we'll have to see how that plays out in the next few days.
And currently, Simon Cho doesn't face any sanctions from U.S. Speedskating, does he?
Based on the information that his admissions earlier today, U.S. Speedskating will be beginning a disciplinary process against Mr. Cho.
And typically, how long might that kind of process take?
You know, it's hard to say because there's a lot of different twists and turns that could take, as with the athlete making an admission, the question becomes, do we still need a full-blown hearing, or does he waive that? Sometimes it can take, a number of weeks to go through, but that's where there's a full-blown hearing. We may or may not have that situation here.
Accusations were also made against U.S. Speed Skating's executive director. Were those looked into, and where does that stand at this point?
That was not considered to be part of our actual investigation. We looked at the three issues: the tampering, and then the allegations of abuse, physical and emotional, and mental.
And let me follow up.
Although earlier I had mentioned a wide range of concerns that skaters expressed, we felt that those concerns influenced the allegations of physical and emotional abuse, and it was difficult to distinguish them completely, so we did reference those allegations as we conducted the investigation.
Greg, let me follow up. There was a complaint under the U.S. Speed Skating disciplinary process, and that process is ongoing.
Howard.
Yeah. The U.S. Olympic Committee has a due process checklist that applies here to athletes. Are you going by this checklist, and which talks about a hearing, talks about notice, talks about a whole series of things that must be done in order for an athlete to be sanctioned in any way?
Sure. Let me address that there in a couple of ways. First, there is referred to as Section 9 of the USOC bylaws, which gives an athlete the right to bring an arbitration if he or she feels that he or she is being denied the opportunity to participate. That applies to coaches as well. So the coaches involved in this may choose to seek to protect their rights under Section 9 of the USOC bylaws, and of course, U.S. Speed Skating is more than prepared to follow all the provisions that are applicable.
This is a requirement of the Ted Stevens Olympic and Amateur Sports Act, so this is federal law. So are you not going to abide by?
Well, first of all, the due process checklist is not part of the Ted Stevens Act. That is something that was developed for the U.S. Olympic Committee by Ed Williams, but it's something that we generally follow as part of the hearing process. So U.S. Speed Skating will, of course, abide by the Ted Stevens Olympic and Amateur Sports Act, as well as the USOC bylaws, as well as our own bylaws.
So just to be clear, are you saying that the Act does not require a hearing, that your interpretation is the Act does not require a hearing?
Howard, that's not at all what I said. What I'm saying is that particular checklist you have in your hand is not part of the Act, so that was an incorrect statement on your part. The Act does require a hearing if a coach or an athlete chooses to go that route.
We have a question on the phone. No? Okay.
Hi, it's Liz Clark from the Washington Post. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Liz.
Oh, good. Okay. I'm sorry. Like Phil, I had a good bit of trouble hearing. So I guess the first question, and this is, I hope this doesn't count as my question, is what is the timetable for the transcript to be posted? I'm just very anxious about, getting things right.
We'll post it.
Will that be today?
Yes, it'll be within the hour.
Okay, so here's my real question, and I imagine it's for Mr. Smith. When the gentleman from the law firm explained that no pattern of abuse was found, it sounds to me almost like an exoneration. And so my question to you is this: what is the U.S. Speed Skating threshold for disciplinary action of a coach? Would it not be a single incident of abuse, or are you looking for a pattern of abuse, or you have to have abused more than half the students? To sort of be extreme. Would something short of a pattern of abuse and evidence of it in a single case, would that be enough for you all to?
This is Greg Little, and I just want to respond initially to the suggestion that the report was an exoneration of the coach. And the coaching methods.
Like to my ears, it sounded
right.
That
well,
way.
and if it sounded that way to your ears, then I would like to clarify that is not at all what was intended, and I don't believe in looking at the report, and again, we have limitations on what we can say, but I just want to make clear that it is not an exoneration of the coaching methods. It's not an endorsement of the coaching methods, but at the same time, it is a conclusion that we made based upon the evidence that we were able to gather, based upon the interviews that we conducted, based upon talking to a number of skaters, including those who decided to stay with the coach, those who decided to leave, and some who decided to leave and then come back with the coach, that we did not believe that there was sufficient evidence to show that skaters skating in this program were subject to abuse and danger as a result of the coaching tactics and methods. But again, it is not an endorsement of those methods. It was uncontroverted that the coaching approach is very extreme. There was no question that there were communication issues, both because of a problem with language skills and to a certain degree with attitude about communication. And the skaters who complained about that, again, there was no attempt to question their sincerity in saying that they found it to be a significant problem. But we believe that it did not rise to a level of rise to a level of physical, emotional, or mental abuse. Then I'll turn it over to Steve, but I just wanted to make sure that if I wasn't as clear as I should have been on that on the front end, I wanted to clarify.
And this is Steve Smith.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
And this is Steve Smith. With respect to your question on U.S. speed skating, our process is when there's a disciplinary complaint made, there's an investigation conducted. Typically, it's conducted by the president or one of his designees. In this case, White & Case was that designee. We've just received an executive summary that is not a full report, and we have to evaluate based on what is given to us excuse me, in that executive summary whether we need to take action based on that, and that's something we'll be doing in the next couple of days.
Howard.
Who, in U.S. speed skating, who conducts the disciplinary process that you just mentioned? How is this? Do you have an ethics committee, or
we have a process? There's two layers to it, because when a potential complaint could lead to a suspension, it goes to essentially the second part of that, which is what we call our appeals commission. And the appeals commission, there'll be a subgroup of the appeals commission appointed to hear evidence in this and to make a decision.
So who are these people who are considering this? Does it include the executive director?
At this point, it's not been submitted to the appeals commission, nor has the appeals commission been selected that would be part of this.
So there's no existing body like.
No, there's. Look at it this way: there's an existing group of people on the appeals commission, but when a case comes in, you don't have the entire appeals commission sit in on it. There's a subgroup of that of 3 that are appointed. And so that subgroup will be the one that would make the decisions on this.
Well, is it possible then that people who have been named in some of these complaints, who are staff members of this organization, are going to be part of one of these commissions conducting this?
Absolutely not. No.
Amy, and then I'm going to take a question from the phone.
Mr. Little, when you talked about the tampering allegations specifically, you said there were a couple of different versions.
Yes.
And I just wondered if they were all distinctly different, or if they supported each other in some facts and not others. So
they were distinctly different in a number of ways. There were some similarities.
You have 3 or 4. You said 3 or 4 versions?
Versions of what took place and how and why. I'm going to defer to Steve as to how much I would be allowed to talk about that until the arbitrator.
At this point, without the arbitrator's permission, I think that's a level we can't go into.
Okay.
But it's a very fair question.
We'll take a question from the phone.
Hi, yes, my name is Siobhan O'Lord, and I actually have a question for White & Case regarding the interviews that they conducted. That brought the evidence that there were no specific. Do you think that your interviews were biased if you interview an adequate number from both sides of the spectrum?
Hi, Siobhan. This is Greg.
Could you repeat the
yes.
question so we can all hear?
She asked if they felt that there was bias in the interviews that took place, and did they interview an adequate number of athletes on both sides of the fence.
Right. And the question was, do we feel like it was an unbiased report? Did we talk to enough people? And Siobhan, I think in fairness, we need to let people know, you were one of the individuals that we interviewed as the fiance of one of the skaters, correct?
Correct.
Right. And thought you were very helpful and very open, and we appreciated your candor in talking with us. When you're conducting an independent investigation, your primary responsibility is to put your bias aside. And I think sometimes it's very difficult for people who are used to seeing episodes of Law and Order and other shows to recognize that lawyers aren't always playing the same role at the same time. And we were trying to make it very clear during every interview that we were not there as advocates of speed skating, that we were not there to defend speed skating against any of the grievances, but similarly, we were not there to look for every opportunity to push as hard and aggressively and zealously as possible the complaints that were made and the allegations that were made by those skaters who had filed grievances. They had a lawyer who was doing that very zealously. Our role was to try to listen to everyone who was willing to talk with us, to weigh all of that information and try to balance it, investigate the motivations, investigate the consistencies, compare the inconsistencies, and when you gather all of that information together, you then reach a result. Again, want to emphasize, this was not an arbitration. We're not arbitrators. These are not final findings of facts. This was our best effort to convey what we found with the limitations that are always imposed on an investigation, and we're comfortable that we remained unbiased throughout the investigation, and particularly with respect to the conclusion. We worked very hard to do that, and I'm very comfortable that we accomplished it. But I'll answer any follow-up you may have.
And when will the report become public?
I will defer to Steve on that.
At this point, we're waiting for a ruling from the arbitrator.
And will
Sorry, I'm going to, Jed, did you have a question?
With coaches suspended and sanctions, decisions on sanctions still pending, this leaves the skaters up in the air. How does the team proceed with training, less than 18 months before Sochi?
Well, clearly the timing is not ideal for anybody, and our chief concern in all of this has always been and will continue to be what's best for our athletes and making sure that they're able to perform at the highest possible level. As I mentioned earlier, we're in the process of trying to find a coach who can take over coaching duties because we are very close to our first World Cup, and hopefully we'll have an announcement about that later today as to who's going to be taking over. But as of Monday, we expect to have an interim coach in place to be able to help the national racing program so that we can have a great season and move closer to Sochi.
And even though this investigation found no pattern of emotional or physical abuse, could there still be sanctions against the coach from USspeedskating?
I think, again, I'm not going to speculate on what sanctions might be. I think right now what we're dealing with is the admission of knowing that the skate tampering incident happened and that they didn't bring it forward. So I think that is what the disciplinary panel will take up when they're convened. Amy.
Yeah, I just had a question, maybe it's for Mr. Little again, about sort of the definition of physical and emotional abuse, because did you define that at the outset, or did you define that as you got into it?
No, remember we said that we did this through the organized Safe Sport, and I have here the Safe Sport where they provided with us their proposed stand. They're still in the process of finalizing them. We looked at a prior arbitration where speed skating coach was being subject to allegations of abuse. And there the arbitrator said there are no firm final guidelines. And so he went to the dictionary. And we looked at that as well. We looked at the code of conduct. We looked at all of those, and there did seem to be some consistency through them with respect to the actual harm, the danger, pattern, but most of all, putting it into context. And I think it's very difficult to do in a press conference, very difficult to do when you're writing an article, but it's absolutely essential to do in reaching a conclusion as to whether there's physical or emotional abuse. A standard that applies to third graders obviously can't be applied to world-class athletes. And again, I want to emphasize these are world-class athletes who, across the board, during the course of the interview, came across very strong, very committed individuals.
So then, in following up, Steve, could there be action taken on something that maybe instead it doesn't rise to the definition of abuse, but maybe it's inappropriate or it's unethical or not what you want?
I think that certainly is a possibility. Again, it's a matter of reviewing the findings and the information that we have, taking a look, matching that to our code of conduct, and deciding what the appropriate course of action is.
Okay.
We'll take a question from the phone and then Howard. Do we have a question on the phone?
Hi, this is Kelly Whiteside from USA Today. Just a little unclear in terms of the timeline. I understand that you can't say how long the disciplinary process will take, but is it expected to be completed before the scheduled arbitration date of November 1st?
I'm not sure that we can necessarily say with any certainty when that process will be wrapped up, Kelly, but I can tell you that it's our intention to wrap it up as swiftly as possible. Obviously, what we believe that what's in the best interest of our athletes is not to have this drag on into the season, so we want to try to dispense with it as quickly as we possibly can.
And then just as a follow-up, I understand this is down the road, but some of the other issues that were mentioned earlier that might have led to this environment in terms of lack of communication, training staff issues, I mean, is that on the table in some way to address the larger issues of the atmosphere and the feeling of the skaters that there wasn't anybody to turn to? I mean, in terms of that step, where is that, on the plate of US Speed Skating?
This is Steve Smith. I'll respond to that. I think US Speed Skating as an NGB has to always be looking at how it does its job, and if there's ways to improve on that, we have to look at that, and I know that will be part of the process going forward.
Thank you.
Howard, and then we'll go back to the phone.
Greg, are you suggesting, based on what you said about trying to find a standard of what would be abusive behavior, and you referred to the arbitrator's report in the Dunks and Kim case. Does that mean that the abuse or the allegations of abuse did not rise to the standard that was applied in the Dunks and Kim case in your judgment?
In our judgment, it did not.